Welcome to Muse Silk Painting Workshop. I am Mandy. Today I'm going to demonstrate step by step how to use this workshop kit. Before we start, I would ask you to prepare a jar of clean water for cleaning the brushes later.
So today we're going to paint this blue flying butterfly. First, let's open the box. On the checking list, we have a color by number page. On top of this page, we have the checking list and a sample step by step for those who don't have internet access to watch the video. And this is a card. The silk is inside of this card. This is a testing silk sheet. You can use it as a draft sheet before you paint the final card. The kitchen towel. And here's our silk dyes, a palette, and a paintbrush. The last thing in this box is an envelope. Now close the box and put it away for later. Let's have a look of the color we need to use today. On top of the page, you find all the colors indicated on top of this page, and underneath the numbers of that color. The numbers represent that color. And those numbers you're going to find in the design in different areas. So when you paint this butterfly, you use a number indicated on the page. For background, you move to the other side of this page. You see the numbers and pointed into the background, and then that's what color to choose when you're painting it. Now I'm ready to paint, so I'm going to paint the silk on the back of this box. It will give us a nice surface. So use a silk paint. Also, I'm not pressing it down firmly. I have left a little gap, so the paint will not stop the color go underneath. And do the same to the other three corners. Now we have a nice flat surface to paint. I will start by mixing the background color. It is a very light pink, so I'm diluting the 488 in the palette. I squeeze a few drops of this dye, and then I'm using the dropper to add roughly 5 times of the water into the dye to make this light pink. Before I paint on the subject or the design, I always test my color on this testing silk. So it's for 2 reasons. One, it's to see if I'm happy with that color, if I want it darker or lighter, just to see if I like that pink. You can add in dye to make the pink brighter or more water to make it lighter. But bear in mind, a silk will dry lighter than it is. So I'm also suggest you to test your paintbrush, how to load it. You will notice the more silk dye you load in your brush, the bigger area the silk dye covers. If you just dip the tip into the dye, then you press your paintbrush on this silk. It covers smaller area. It's good to know this technique because in the design we have some very small area. When we paint the small area, we really don't need to load a lot of paint. As you see the silk dye spreading on the silk, if our paintbrush have too much paint on, the color will run off the golden line. To paint the background, you just need to load your paintbrush and then transfer the dye from your palette to the background. It's really easy and it will give you a very good idea how silk behaves. You get comfortable with loading your paintbrush. When my paintbrush is full, I always put them down away from the object I'm going to paint, avoiding the dye runs into my butterfly. So when I'm approaching to the edge of the butterfly, I slow down, and also I'm not going with a fully loaded paintbrush. I have half-dried paintbrush. Then go slower. And keep adding more dye to the white area. You don't need to worry about if the paint doesn't look even, because silk as a fabric, it will absorb the dye and even it up by itself. And also it creates a very smooth texture when it's not very even. One thing you need to remember is try paint the whole background when wet on wet, not wet on dry. When it's wet on dry on silk, it will leave watermarks. You can see those dark little dots behind. They're because the backing paper is absorbing some dyes, and we don't need to worry about that. It's not obvious once the dye is dry. And I just like to show you how I wash my paintbrush. I will press it firmly down to the bottom or against the wall, and to make sure I squeeze all the dye out of my paintbrush, and then I'll absorb all the water in a kitchen towel before I load the color, because the paintbrush, if it's too wet, it will dilute the color we're going to load. And my next color is a darker red. I don't need to dilute it. Be very careful. Try not to bring your fully loaded paintbrush on top of the lighter color. Sometimes it drops down if the brush is too full. Again, slow down your speed when you're getting closer to the golden lines. We don't really need to draw with our paintbrush. We just need to press it, let the silk absorb the dyes. So all you need to do is just adding dyes on silk. Without worrying about the brush strokes. Now I've finished the background, I'm going to moving on to the butterfly itself. This is the lighter blue and the black. So I'm going to start again with the lightest color on the object. Wash my paintbrush. And dry the water. Now I take this color by number page and find the color I'm going to paint and make sure the number is right before preparing it. So 618, that is the lightest blue. As we go through this painting, you will realize that we don't need a lot of dye to cover the area. For this part of the wing, I only half loading my paintbrush. If you don't load enough, you can always add in on it. But if the paintbrush is too full, it will run out of the resistance. Wash my paintbrush and move to the next color. It's a darker blue here. Some colors are very similar, so if you cannot tell the difference, you can always check the numbers. 265. You see, the dyes in the palette look all dark, very similar. So in case if you forget which one is which, you can always use a testing sheet to find it out, to remind yourself, okay, this is a red. And this is a blue. Let's continue on the butterfly. It's a darker blue. Again, as you can see, my paintbrush only have the blue loaded on the top half of the brush. So there's not a lot of dye on my paintbrush. The smaller area we need to cover, the less dye we need to load. I go very, very slow when the shape is narrow or small. And I will follow the dye instead of leading it. Because silk is really know how much dye it wants to hold. Any extra will be absorbed on the back paper, or sometimes will ruin your painting. Now we're moving on to 246, which you will find on the wings and the body. The body part area is very small, so I'm just touching it with a paintbrush tip, and I lift my paintbrush quickly just to see if I left enough dye to cover the area. If it's not, I just load my pen and put a little bit more. Well, we're moving on to the last color on this butterfly. That's, oops, I missed a little bit blue out on the wing, so I'm going to add it in. That is a mini area. It's too small, so I dry my paintbrush before I go to that area. I let the kitchen towel absorb some of the dye. So when we dry the paintbrush, we want to dry the handle as well, because sometimes the water hidden on the handle can drop down to your paint and leave a watermark if the areas has been already painted. The last color is black. Silk painting and watercolor painting are very similar. They are different because watercolor painting are used on paper, silk painting are used on silk. But I find very similar. It's when you paint watercolor, we like to paint from the lighter to the dark too. On silk painting, I do that because especially when it's a gutta outline involved in the design, that's because if there's a gap on my design, the lighter color will run into the darker area, and then I can cover it later on when I paint the darker part. But if I paint the darker part first, and then I realize that my gutta is not fully closed, so the color run out to the lighter area, and I cannot fix that. So this is my finished painting. What's yours looks like? Would you like to take a photo and share with me? I hope you enjoyed today's workshop. And I record a different video for making your painting into a frame. Feel free to check it out if you need to frame your painting into this greeting card or the other type of frames.